Welcome to the DecisionWise podcast series. My name is Justin Warner, and I'll be your host for today's podcast. I'm joined today by Dan Deka, a DecisionWise senior consultant and executive coach. He is responsible for partnering with individuals, teams, and organizations to help them design experiences that illuminate leadership potential and improve employee engagement. In Dan's 20-year career in human resources, it spans the fields from employee relations, performance management, organizational design, change management, employee engagement, leadership, and executive development. These experiences have been cultivated from positions with Packard Bell, Wells Fargo, Capital One, Real Networks, Micron Technologies, and most recently as the manager of organizational development for a global nonprofit. Dan, thanks so much for being with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here and super fun to talk about concepts that I care about a lot.
Great.
So thank you.
You bet. So this month, our podcast will focus on the DecisionWise Employee Engagement Magic Model. The best-selling book, Magic, The 5 Keys to Unlock the Power of Employee Engagement, specifically outlines each of these 5 keys and their impact on building employee engagement within your organization. The 5 keys are meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. Today, we will be discussing impact's relationship with employee engagement. So Dan, let's start off with that. There's often a lot of discussion around impact and meaning and how the two are very correlated. Can we just start our discussion by talking about how they're similar and how they might be different as well?
Sure. Yeah, they're both closely correlated, and I think about it as meaning. When I'm an employee and I'm thinking about my job, meaning helps me clarify the why I do the work. And then the impact, I end up seeing the what, the results of my work. So the combination of those two are very closely correlated because you can see that of like, why am I doing something? I'm doing something to have an impact. So they're closely correlated. But then when we did all the statistics and put them out, they're distinctive enough to stand alone, and we have questions for each one. But they're very personal, very correlated with each other.
Great. So let's take that in terms of a personal approach that we see with impact, and that it is very personal. If I'm an employee, how can I understand what the impact is that I'm making in an organization, and how does that lead to building or improving my employee engagement?
Okay. Well, I think when I think about you're talking about the employee's perspective, and I'd first start with the manager's perspective. You know, the manager has the responsibility to create an environment where employees can make that connection and see the impact that they're making. So manager has that responsibility to create that. So to create goals, to create a vision, to create a way that employees can see the impact of their work. And then I'd say the employee has the opportunity and the responsibility to make that choice to engage in that environment. So employees can ask those questions around what are our goals? And if they're not clear, they can ask those. What is our strategy? To be clear on those. And if they can't see the impact of their work, the end state of it, then they can ask their manager for more information and for more access. But I still even see that, like most things about engagement are a 50-50 deal. Mm-hmm. Management creates the environment, employee makes the choice to engage, and I think impact is another perfect example of that.
Of where they can do that. That's great. So when we talk about the individual and we look at that, and I know you coach a lot of individuals with this, sometimes it's really hard to celebrate our successes, right? Where we can see maybe we've created a goal, we've improved or achieved that goal. Why is that hard for us sometimes to celebrate our successes, and how can we as individuals maybe retrain our brain or refocus it? That's okay to celebrate our successes and see the impact that we're having.
I think a lot of people, especially people that are successful, have gotten there by setting high goals, attaining them, figuring out what wasn't working for them, and then closing that gap. And a lot of times I see people stuck so strongly on that pattern that they can't celebrate the progress that they make. They're always talking about what's next. And it's an interesting paradox, an interesting balance, because you always want to set goals, but then you don't want to just achieve them and then set the next goals without celebrating some success. And that's hard for people to balance. So I think just the balance on that is setting the goals, but then taking that time. And a manager, in another question we talked about, what does the employee do? What does the manager?
Yeah.
Sometimes a manager plays a big role in slowing employees down and saying, hey, you did do that, and thank you. And And what did you learn from that? A lot of times I think of things as we don't just learn from experience, we learn from the debrief of experience. And we learn from not just achieving the goal, but what did we learn from that? What adjustments do we want to make? And I think we can slow down a little bit there. Even in that process of debriefing, can slow down a little bit, see the impact we made, see what we learned, make some adjustments, and then set those next goals. But there's some element of slowing down that's important for this.
Oh, that's interesting. So, you've hit on a couple of times that managers and organizations need to create an environment where impact can be recognized and employees can feel that. Where do rewards and recognition fall into that area? We often here at DecisionWise describe rewards and recognition more as satisfaction-based elements. Where does that fall into this whole picture when it comes to impact?
I think it adds in, if we talk about you want to know what the impact that you're having, then you have to be clear on what you're after. And so a manager needs to set that up, an environment needs to have where you can measure something. You have to know what your target is so you can measure it. You have to be close enough to it. We'll talk about terms of proximity. We actually see that. And then there's some value to it. But you have to set up that measurement. This is what the goal is. If you don't have the goal, it's hard to recognize. To recognize when you achieved it, when you're making progress, when you're off track. So I think in terms of impact and what managers can do and how recognition fits in there, it all lines up together. Be clear on what you want to achieve, set that context, set the goal, and then be able to provide that feedback, both reinforcing feedback, you're on the right direction, or maybe a little bit redirecting feedback, you need to make some adjustment. And to me, that's all based on, do you have a goal in place?
Oh, that's fantastic. So in the Magic Book, we talk a little bit about different types of impact that organizations can have, and internal impact, external impact, and even social impact. And a lot of those who will be reading and listening to our blog, reading our blog and listening to our podcast will, are really involved in social type activities. What does that mean to have impact in your life outside of work as well, and what those social factors that we have both internally and externally? Kind of talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah, I think internally there are these things, almost those self-motivation factors that we see in those goals that we set for ourselves, and then we have goals within the organization, and then I think you have some of these goals that kind of proceed outside of the organization and outside of yourself, and it depends a lot on how you set up your goals, but you can set those up to be able to see that and to align those things. And when you talk about external impact, I just think about, it's in the book, and then also just a client that we work with Habitat for Humanity. It's such a great illustration of being able to see the results of your work and the impact. You go and you volunteer with them, you're doing something for a good cause, but then by the end of the day, you actually have built something. You may have finished a house, but if nothing else, you might have put in a window or put a door there, and you're able to see that impact and connect it to the whole. That someone's going to be able to live in this house, and it's from something that I did. So that's just a great example of connection on both an individual basis. I have these goals I want to help, and then this bigger context around external factors. I'm building houses for people, and then even bigger than that, I'm helping with this cause. So that's a great example of kind of how all those connect with one of our clients.
Great. So Dan, as you've worked with organizations, do you have an example of a company where impact was something that might have been holding them back from engagement, or an example where impact was really something that was a driving force for engagement within an organization?
Well, I think just some general examples that I see is when I've worked with some manufacturing companies and partners. You can have somebody that's literally or proverbially on a assembly line, and if they feel like they're just putting their one piece into this bigger puzzle, and there's no connection to the end result, and they can't see that, and they're a long distance from that, it is hard for them to feel engaged about the impact that they're having. And so with that, we've just worked with organizations to be able to get people, even just as simply as out of the production line, and being able to see what comes out at the end, and being able to see that product, whether it's a phone or it's a microchip or it's a car, being able to see that end result. So yeah, just being aware of can employees see that entire kind of life cycle and that path, and the end result and the impact on a customer is super important.
Oh, that's great. Well, Dan, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts on impact today. Before we end, any last thoughts on impact and how employees and organizations can really use this to help drive employee engagement in the organization?
The only other thing that comes to mind is just the relationship between effort and impact. I think there's just a strong, simple, and a lot of consulting things, we like those 2x2 boxes. But if you think about effort, if you put in a lot of effort, but you don't see a lot of impact, you can get in this burnout situation. Like, I'm doing a lot of work, but I'm not seeing that impact. And that's an interesting element in relationship to being burnt out in your work. And then if you're not putting in much effort, and you're not having much impact, there's this kind of apathetic thing of like, what kind of difference does it make? Or you could be putting in low effort and getting high results, and it's so easy, it doesn't even energize you. So the relationship between effort and impact, when you have that place where you put in a lot of effort and you actually see that impact, to me, that's almost the definition of engagement. And so that's kind of what we're always shooting at with our clients, is try to find that place with managers and with employees where you've got that right balance between impact and effort.
Great. Dan, thanks again so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Sure appreciate that. And this concludes our podcast for today.